Most people sense that something is off in modern society, but they cannot quite put their finger on it. They feel it in conversations that no longer happen, in spaces that feel emptier than they used to, and in relationships that never even get the chance to begin. What I'm going to talk about today is uncomfortable, rarely discussed honestly, and easy to misunderstand if you only look at the surface. But if you stay with me until the end, you will see a clear pattern emerging, one that explains not only what is happening between men and women, but where society itself is heading next. Before we get into it, make sure you like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell, and select all if you want more Angry Guy content and want every single video the moment we release it. These conversations matter, and the algorithm only pushes them forward when you do. Also, if you want to protect yourself financially and build real independence in an unstable world, check out Angry's Crypto Academy. It is linked in the description of this video. The Academy walks you through how to buy, sell, and trade crypto responsibly, how to safeguard your assets, and how to position yourself for long term wealth instead of short term hype. If you're serious about your future, go check it out now. And if you're enjoying these Angry Guy videos and want to support the channel directly, you can buy me a Red Bull using the link in the description. It helps keep this content coming and keeps the lights on. Now, let us get into the heart of this discussion because what is happening right now is far bigger than dating apps, relationship debates, or cultural trends. What is happening is a quiet, gradual separation that most people do not even realize is taking place. Men are not protesting in the streets. They are not making loud announcements. They are not asking for permission or validation. They are simply stepping back, closing doors, and redirecting their energy elsewhere. And many women do not see it happening until they suddenly realize the door is locked. When people hear the idea that men are locking women out of society, it sounds extreme at first. It sounds like a provocation or a slogan designed to get attention. But when you stop reacting emotionally and start observing behavior, incentives, and outcomes, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. This is not about men forming secret councils or coordinating in dark rooms. This is about millions of individual decisions aligning in the same direction, driven by incentives, risk avoidance, and the pursuit of peace. Across the developed world, men are slowly removing women from the center of their lives, not just romantically, but socially, economically, and psychologically. This is not happening in one country or one culture. It is happening everywhere at once because the underlying conditions are similar everywhere. The incentives have changed, the risks have increased, and the rewards have diminished. When those three factors align, behavior always follows. And consider what the numbers already show. In the United States alone, projections indicate that by 2030, nearly half of women between the ages of 25 and 44 will be single and childless. When you include single mothers, that figure climbs dramatically, meaning the majority of women in that age group will not be in stable, long term partnerships. This is not because men disappeared physically, it is because men withdrew voluntarily. They stopped participating. When people discuss declining birth rates or relationship breakdowns, the conversation is almost always framed as something women are choosing. The narrative suggests that women are opting out of marriage, opting out of motherhood, or prioritizing careers instead. But this explanation falls apart when you examine male behavior. Men are the ones who propose. Men are the ones who approach. Men are the ones who historically initiate relationships, pay for dates, build households, and absorb most of the risk. When men stop doing those things, the entire system collapses, regardless of what women want. This pattern is already fully visible in countries that are slightly ahead of the West in terms of demographic change. South Korea is one of the clearest examples. It is often framed as a place where women collectively withdrew from men through movements like 4B, refusing dating, marriage, and children. But this explanation ignores what actually happened on the ground. The collapse did not begin with women opting out. It began with men changing their behavior in response to escalating social and institutional risk. Over time, policies and cultural pressures made normal male behavior increasingly risky. Asking a woman out became something that could be interpreted as inappropriate. Persistence, which was once seen as confidence, became something that could be framed as a problem. Men responded not by arguing endlessly, but by adjusting their behavior to minimize risk. When rules were introduced limiting how many times a man could express interest before facing consequences, men complied fully. They stopped asking altogether. What was framed as protection became a deterrent. The same pattern repeated in the workplace. When men were told they were unfairly gatekeeping advancement, they did not fight the accusation endlessly. They accepted the framing and changed their behavior. Instead of mentoring, assisting, or advocating, they shifted to strict competition. They stopped offering informal help. They stopped sharing advantages. They treated women not as teammates, but as rivals because that was the safest position to take. The result was not equality. The result was isolation. Entertainment followed the same path. When humor and social interaction were increasingly scrutinized, men disengaged. They stopped watching. They stopped participating. When content was redesigned to avoid offense, it lost the audience that sustained it. The people who demanded changes were left with environments that felt empty and lifeless, not because of a conspiracy, but because the people who created energy had quietly left. This same withdrawal is now happening globally. Men are not loudly rejecting society. They are simply building parallel lives that require less explanation, less negotiation, and less exposure to risk. They are focusing on peace, autonomy, and stability, even if that means a simpler life. Online spaces reflect this shift clearly. Entire ecosystems have emerged that are primarily male focused, not because women are explicitly banned, but because the content, tone, and incentives align with male priorities. Financial independence, self sufficiency, analytical discussion, and personal responsibility form the backbone of these spaces. Men gather there not to complain endlessly, but to exchange information, refine strategies, and adapt. Gaming, finance, technology, and personal development communities increasingly overlap with discussions about social dynamics, not because men are obsessed with conflict, but because they are trying to understand risk. When the cost of misunderstanding becomes too high, analysis becomes necessary. This is why mathematical, economic, and strategic frameworks are now applied to topics that were once purely emotional. At the same time, traditional social structures that depended on male participation are deteriorating. Dating culture collapses when men stop initiating. Restaurants struggle when men stop paying for dates. Bars and clubs feel empty when men stop buying drinks. Gyms lose revenue when men retreat into home setups or private groups. These are not moral judgments, they are economic realities. Men historically funded large portions of these ecosystems through participation and spending. When that spending dries up, the system shrinks. This is why you increasingly see spaces filled with people who are waiting for something to happen rather than making it happen. The energy source has been disconnected. And another important factor is technology. As automation and artificial intelligence reshape labor markets, men are adapting by creating flexible, decentralized ways to earn, trade, and collaborate. Remote work, crypto based systems, peer to peer skill exchanges, and informal networks are growing precisely because they allow independence. These systems require trust, competence, and reciprocity. They reward contribution over presentation. Many women find themselves disconnected from these emerging systems, not because of explicit exclusion, but because the incentives do not align with consumer oriented models. When survival and resilience become priorities, spending habits change. Men reduce consumption, focus on utility, and reinvest resources. They simplify. This makes them less vulnerable during instability. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. As the shift accelerates, governments face shrinking tax bases and rising dependency. Men, who historically paid a disproportionate share of taxes, reduce participation or optimize around systems that take less. This has downstream effects on public programs and institutions that assumed continued male participation. The state cannot replace what voluntary cooperation once provided. Meanwhile, many men are choosing geographic mobility. They relocate or travel to environments where social expectations align more closely with their values. Lower cost of living, clearer social roles, and fewer institutional risks make these choices attractive. This is not about domination or control, it is about predictability and peace. All of this leads to a stark reality that is difficult for many to accept. Society did not collapse because men were defeated. It is changing because men disengaged. When builders stop building, the structure does not protest, it simply decays. This does not mean men are happier in every sense. It means they are prioritizing stability over approval, solitude over chaos, long term resilience over short term validation. Many men discover that once they step away from constant negotiation, their stress levels drop, their savings increase, and their sense of control improves. This reinforces the behavior. What we are witnessing is not a dramatic revolution, but a quiet realignment. Men are choosing paths that require less permission and fewer explanations. Women who depended on systems built around male participation now find those systems fading, not because of cruelty, but because of incentives. To understand where this separation ultimately leads, you have to stop thinking in terms of emotions and start thinking in terms of systems. Societies are not held together by slogans or ideals. They are held together by incentives, mutual benefit, and a shared belief that cooperation is worth the effort. When that belief erodes, people do not usually announce their exit. They quietly reduce their involvement until their absence becomes noticeable only after the damage is done. One of the biggest mistakes people make when analyzing this shift is assuming that men are acting out of anger or resentment. That assumption misses the point entirely. Anger is loud, resentment seeks confrontation. What we are seeing instead is indifference. Indifference is far more powerful because it requires no energy to sustain. When men stop caring about winning approval, being understood, or being validated, the entire dynamic changes. You cannot negotiate with someone who has already decided to leave the room. This indifference shows up first in small, almost invisible ways. Men stop initiating conversations. They stop offering help unless explicitly asked. They stop giving the benefit of the doubt. They stop explaining themselves. Each of these changes seems insignificant on its own, but together they create a social vacuum. The emotional labor that once smoothed over friction disappears. What remains is a colder, more transactional environment. Many women interpret this shift as hostility, but hostility would imply engagement. What they are actually experiencing is disengagement. Men are not trying to punish anyone, they are optimizing for safety, clarity, and peace. In an environment where intentions are frequently questioned and outcomes are unpredictable, withdrawal becomes the rational choice. This is why the phrase men walking away resonates so strongly. It captures something that people intuitively feel but struggle to articulate. Men are not marching away in unison, they are individually stepping back from institutions, relationships, and expectations that no longer serve them. The result looks coordinated even though it is not. The dating landscape is one of the most visible examples. Apps promised efficiency and choice, but they also introduced relentless comparison and disposability. Men quickly learned that effort no longer correlated with outcomes. The same behaviors that once led to connection now carried reputational or emotional risk, so men adapted. They lowered expectations or opted out entirely. Some focused exclusively on self improvement without any intention of dating. Others decided that short term interactions were not worth the long term cost. Many simply deleted the apps and never returned. This has a cascading effect. When fewer men participate, the remaining participants gain disproportionate attention. This creates an illusion of abundance for some women while masking the underlying scarcity of male engagement. Over time, this imbalance becomes unsustainable. Shared partners cannot provide stability, and competition increases rather than decreases. The system feeds on itself until burnout sets in. Outside of dating, the same withdrawal affects friendships. Men are increasingly selective about who they invest time in. Mixed gender friendships become less common, not because men dislike women, but because ambiguity carries risk. Men prioritize relationships that are straightforward, reciprocal, and free from misinterpretation. This naturally leads them toward male only circles where expectations are clearer. Workplaces feel the impact as well. Informal mentoring declines. Collaboration becomes rigid. Communication is filtered through policy rather than trust. When every interaction is documented or potentially scrutinized, people default to minimum engagement. Creativity suffers. Initiative slows. The environment becomes technically compliant but spiritually hollow. As these changes accumulate, entire industries feel the strain. Hospitality, entertainment, and leisure sectors rely heavily on discretionary spending driven by social interaction. When men reduce participation, revenue declines. Businesses respond by cutting costs or changing their offerings, often in ways that further reduce appeal. This creates a downward spiral that is difficult to reverse. At the same time, alternative economies quietly expand. Men gravitate toward spaces where effort produces tangible results. Skill based exchanges, digital assets, and decentralized platforms offer autonomy and transparency. These systems reward competence rather than performance. They are not perfect, but they feel fairer to those who participate. The rise of remote work accelerates this trend. Men no longer need Leah to tolerate environments that feel hostile or unfulfilling. They can earn income without constant oversight. They can live more simply. They can relocate. Physical proximity to traditional social structures becomes optional. This freedom fundamentally alters bargaining power. Another factor shaping this divide is consumption versus production. Historically, men have skewed toward production, building systems and infrastructure, while women have driven consumption. This balance worked when production was rewarded and consumption fueled growth. But as economic pressure increases, production becomes more valuable than consumption. Those who create value gain leverage. Those who rely on spending face constraints. When economic uncertainty rises, men instinctively cut expenses and focus on resilience. They save, invest, and prepare. They downsize lifestyles. They reduce obligations. This behavior cushions them against shocks. Women, on average, face greater pressure to maintain appearances and social signaling, which becomes harder to sustain without external support. This divergence is not about superiority, it is about adaptation. Groups that adapt to changing conditions survive. Those that cling to outdated assumptions struggle. The current environment rewards self sufficiency, flexibility, and risk management. Men who embrace these traits thrive relative to those who do not. Governments and institutions are slow to adjust because they are built on assumptions of continued participation. When large numbers of men reduce work hours, exit traditional employment, or optimize tax exposure, public finances weaken. Programs designed around constant growth face funding gaps. Policymakers respond with incentives, messaging, or pressure, but these tools are blunt and often ineffective. This creates tension. Institutions need men to re engage, but they cannot force genuine participation without coercion. At the same time, men see little reason to return to systems that penalize them for involvement. The stalemate persists and the gap widens. Culturally, narratives lag behind reality. Media often portrays men as passive beneficiaries of society, ignoring the labor and risk that sustained previous systems. This disconnect fuels misunderstanding. When contributions go unrecognized or are framed negatively, motivation declines. Appreciation matters more than praise. Men respond to respect, not flattery. In response, many men redefine success. Instead of chasing status through relationships or careers, they focus on autonomy. They measure progress by freedom, not approval. This internal metric is harder to manipulate and less vulnerable to external judgment. It also makes men less predictable, which unsettles systems that relied on consistent behavior. Technology plays a dual role here. On one hand, it enables isolation. Entertainment, communication, and productivity tools allow men to meet needs without physical interaction. On the other hand, it facilitates community among those who share values. Online groups, forums, and networks provide support and knowledge exchange without traditional gatekeepers. These communities often operate on merit. Ideas are evaluated on usefulness rather than presentation. Status is earned through contribution. This appeals to men who feel alienated by performative environments. Over time, loyalty shifts from institutions to networks. The consequences for women become more apparent as time passes. Many find themselves navigating systems that no longer respond as expected. Opportunities feel narrower. Support feels conditional. Appeals to authority produce diminishing returns. Without male participation, many structures lose efficiency and warmth. Some women adapt by embracing self sufficiency. Others double down on institutional reliance. The outcomes vary, but the overall trend remains. The center of gravity has shifted. The old social contract no longer functions as designed. It is important to note that none of this is inevitable destiny. Systems can change, incentives can be realigned, trust can be rebuilt, but that requires acknowledging reality rather than denying it. It requires understanding why men walked away instead of assuming they must be coerced back. Re engagement cannot be forced, it must be earned. Men need to see clear benefits, reduce risk, and genuine respect. Without those conditions, withdrawal remains the rational choice. As artificial intelligence continues to reshape labor markets, this dynamic intensifies. Jobs that once provided identity and stability disappear. Those who adapt quickly gain an advantage. Men, accustomed to problem solving and abstraction, often pivot faster. They experiment, fail, adjust, and try again. This iterative approach suits volatile environments. Women, facing different social pressures, may experience this transition differently. The gap is not moral or intellectual, it is structural. Systems built for a previous era struggle to support new realities. What emerges is a world of parallel tracks. Men operate in flexible, decentralized networks. Women navigate legacy systems that are increasingly strained. Interaction between these tracks becomes optional rather than necessary. When interaction is optional, It must be mutually beneficial to persist. This is the quiet truth many people resist. Society does not collapse all at once. It fragments, pieces drift apart. Some adapt faster than others. Those who notice early have options. Those who deny reality until it is unavoidable face constraints. To, to understand how deep this separation goes, you have to look forward rather than backward. Most people are still arguing about who caused the breakdown, but the people who adapt early are already living in a different world. The most powerful changes do not happen in headlines. They happen in habits. They happen in what people stop doing long before they stop believing. And right now, a generation of men is growing up with a completely different understanding of relationships, society, and obligation than the generations before them. Young men today are not being shaped by the same expectations their fathers and grandfathers lived under. They are not being told that adulthood begins with marriage, home ownership, and providing for a family at all costs. Instead, they are being shown endless examples of risk without reward, effort without appreciation, and responsibility without authority. They are learning not through lectures, but through observation. And what they are observing is enough to permanently change their trajectory. This generation has watched men lose careers over misunderstandings. They have watched families dissolve with devastating financial consequences. They have watched institutions shift accountability in only one direction. When you grow up seeing these outcomes repeatedly, you do not rebel loudly. You adjust quietly. You learn what to avoid. You learn what not to sign up for. You learn where the exits are before you ever enter the building. This is why attempts to reverse these trends through messaging alone are failing. Campaigns urging men to engage more, commit more, or participate more misunderstand the core issue. Men are not confused. They are cautious. They are not lacking information, they are applying it. When experience teaches a lesson consistently, slogans cannot override it. At the same time, many women are being given a completely different set of expectations. They are told that independence means freedom from compromise, that fulfillment is self defined, and that support will always be available through institutions if personal networks fail. For a time, this belief feels empowering, but beliefs that are not grounded in sustainable systems eventually collide with reality. What happens when institutional support weakens? What happens when public resources shrink? What happens when social trust erodes? These questions are no longer theoretical. They are already being answered in slow motion. As men disengage from traditional pathways, fewer people step into leadership roles that require sacrifice without recognition. Fewer people volunteer for responsibility that carries disproportionate risk. Over time, the quality of governance declines. Bureaucracy expands to compensate for the absence of informal cooperation. Rules multiply where trust once existed. This further discourages participation, creating a self reinforcing cycle. Communities feel this loss acutely. Local organizations struggle to recruit volunteers. Civic spaces empty out. Shared rituals disappear. The glue that held people together weakens. In its place, people retreat into private worlds curated for safety and predictability. For men, this retreat often looks like minimalism. Smaller living spaces, fewer possessions, lower overhead. Digital tools replace physical ones. Skills replace status symbols. Men learn to fix, build, trade, and adapt. These are not glamorous changes, but they are effective. They reduce dependency and increase resilience. For women, the transition is often more turbulent. Social validation has historically played a larger role in identity formation. When public attention fragments and institutional assurances weaken, anxiety rises. Many women feel pressure to maintain standards that no longer align with economic reality. Debt increases, stress compounds. Without stable partnerships to absorb shocks, every setback feels heavier. This is not a judgment, it is an observation of structural differences. When systems change, groups experience those changes differently. The question is not who deserves what, but who adapts fastest. One of the most overlooked consequences of this divide is how it affects cooperation itself. Cooperation requires trust, shared incentives, and clear expectations. When those elements disappear, people default to self preservation. They limit exposure. They formalize interactions. They protect themselves first. This is why even simple exchanges become transactional. Favors turn into invoices. Help becomes conditional. Generosity shrinks, not because people become cruel, but because uncertainty makes generosity risky. When you cannot predict how an action will be interpreted or repaid, the safest move is to do less. Over time, this environment reshapes social norms. Acts that were once spontaneous become rare. People stop offering advice unprompted. They stop mentoring informally. They stop intervening. Everyone becomes more cautious, more isolated, more guarded. Men, in particular, internalize a rule that has become increasingly important. If an action carries asymmetric risk, avoid it. This rule governs everything from conversation to collaboration. It explains why men withdraw not only from romantic relationships, but from mixed gender spaces altogether. Clarity becomes more valuable than connection. As this clarity seeking behavior spreads, parallel cultures solidify. Men form tight knit groups based on shared interests and mutual respect. These groups often operate quietly, without branding or public visibility. They are not movements, they are networks. And networks are far more resilient than movements. These networks share information about finances, technology, health, and survival. They exchange skills. They pool resources when needed. They provide social support without bureaucracy. Trust is earned through contribution, not credentials. This model scales naturally in uncertain environments. Women are often excluded from these networks, not through explicit rules, but through alignment. The culture values blunt communication, accountability, and utility. Those who thrive in such environments do so regardless of gender, but the barriers to entry are real. Many women find these spaces unwelcoming, not because of hostility, but because the norms feel unfamiliar or uncomfortable. As a result, women tend to cluster in systems that emphasize support and inclusion. When those systems are well funded and stable, they function. When funding declines or trust erodes, they struggle. Without a productive base to sustain them, they become fragile. The broader economy reflects this shift. Industries that rely on social spending shrink. Industries that enable independence grow. Tools that reduce reliance on others gain popularity. Education shifts from credential focused to skill focused. People care less about titles and more about capabilities. This is why traditional career paths lose appeal. Long timelines, opaque advancement, and political navigation feel inefficient compared to direct value creation. Men increasingly choose paths where effort translates directly into results. Freelancing, contracting, trading, and entrepreneurship appeal because they minimize dependency. As more men choose these paths, the labor market changes. Full time employment becomes less attractive. Companies struggle to retain talent. They respond with incentives and messaging, but flexibility often matters more than perks. Control over time becomes a primary currency. Women navigating this environment face different challenges. Careers built around collaboration and institutional support become harder to sustain. Advancement paths narrow, competition increases. Without stable family structures to buffer stress, burnout rises. This divergence feeds cultural tension. Each side feels misunderstood. Men feel blamed for disengaging. Women feel abandoned by systems they were told would provide security. Dialogue becomes difficult because both sides are reacting to real pressures, but interpreting them through different frameworks. Attempts to bridge the gap often fail because they address symptoms rather than causes. Encouraging empathy without addressing risk does nothing. Promoting participation without restoring trust feels hollow. Solutions that ignore incentives are doomed. The uncomfortable truth is that stability requires cooperation, and cooperation requires fairness. When people believe the rules apply unevenly, they stop playing. Men have reached that conclusion in large numbers. Reversing it would require more than promises. It would require structural change. Until then, fragmentation continues. Society becomes less cohesive but more adaptive in pockets. People build micro environments that suit their needs. Some thrive, others struggle. The shared narrative weakens. This fragmentation also affects children. Fewer stable households mean fewer consistent role models. Young boys grow up observing withdrawal as normal. They learn to rely on themselves early. Young girls grow up expecting support that may not materialize. Expectations diverge further. Education systems struggle to keep up. Curricula lag behind reality. Advice feels outdated. Young people turn to peers and online communities for guidance. Authority decentralizes. In this environment, those who can think independently and act decisively gain an edge. Those who wait for permission fall behind. This favors certain personality traits and disadvantages others. The distribution of outcomes becomes wider. Despite this, there is an opportunity hidden in the chaos. Individuals who understand the shift can position themselves wisely. They can build skills that travel. They can reduce dependencies. They can form resilient networks. They can choose environments deliberately. This does not require cynicism, it requires realism. Acknowledging that the old social contract has changed is not pessimism, it is preparation. As we move forward, the question is not whether men and women can coexist. They always will. The question is under what conditions cooperation becomes worthwhile again. That answer will determine the shape of the next era. At this stage, many people begin asking whether any of this can be reversed. They look for a reset button, policy change, cultural shift, or a moment of collective realization that brings everyone back together. That instinct is understandable, but it misunderstands how systems evolve. Systems rarely reverse cleanly. They adapt, harden, and reorganize around new incentives. Once a large group learns that disengagement offers more stability than participation, it becomes extremely difficult to persuade them to return without fundamentally changing the rules of the game. This is why so many reconciliation efforts feel hollow. They focus on tone rather than structure. They call for better communication without addressing risk. They promote togetherness without restoring trust. They assume that people withdrew because of misunderstanding rather than calculation. When solutions fail repeatedly, frustration grows and the divide deepens. Men, in particular, are not responding to appeals rooted in emotion or obligation. They have already weighed those factors and found them wanting. What would bring them back is not guilt or nostalgia, but clarity and fairness, clear expectations, clear boundaries, clear consequences that apply evenly. Without those elements, any invitation to re engage feels like a request to absorb risk without compensation. This is why attempts to shame men into participation often backfire. Shame only works when people care deeply about social approval. Men who have disengaged no longer do. They have replaced external validation with internal metrics. They judge success by peace of mind, financial stability, and freedom of movement. These metrics are not easily influenced by public opinion. The same applies to calls for empathy that are not reciprocated. Empathy without accountability feels one sided. Men notice when understanding flows in only one direction. Over time, they stop offering it altogether. Emotional withdrawal follows practical withdrawal. What makes this especially difficult to address is that many of the benefits men gain from disengagement are immediate and tangible: reduced stress, increased savings, greater autonomy. These gains reinforce behavior quickly. In contrast, the costs of disengagement are diffuse and long term, spread across society rather than concentrated on the individual. Humans respond more strongly to immediate feedback than abstract future consequences. This creates a classic collective action problem. Society needs participation to function, but individuals are rewarded for opting out. Without mechanisms that realign incentives, the rational choice remains withdrawal. Some observers argue that economic pressure will eventually force men back into traditional roles. Rising costs, housing shortages, and labor demands, they suggest, will compel re engagement. But this argument overlooks adaptability. Men do not simply submit to pressure, they innovate around it. They reduce needs, they relocate, they find alternatives. Pressure accelerates adaptation rather than compliance. And this adaptability is evident in how men approach housing, transportation, and consumption. Shared living arrangements among men become more common. Remote work reduces commuting. Digital goods replace physical ones. Needs shrink. When needs shrink, leverage shifts. The same adaptability appears in social life. Men form smaller, tighter circles. They invest deeply in a few relationships rather than broadly across many. Loyalty increases within these circles because trust is earned and maintained. These relationships provide support without the volatility of larger, more ambiguous networks. Women observing this shift often misinterpret it as emotional coldness, but from the male perspective, it is emotional efficiency. Energy is finite. Investing it where returns are predictable is not cruelty, it is survival. This difference in interpretation fuels misunderstanding. Each side feels wronged. Each side feels unseen. Dialogue becomes reactive rather than constructive. In such an environment, reconciliation requires more than conversation. It requires rebuilding shared reality. Rebuilding shared reality would mean acknowledging uncomfortable truths on all sides. It would mean admitting that some systems rewarded dependency over contribution. It would mean recognizing that protection without responsibility breeds resentment. It would mean accepting that safety mechanisms can become barriers when misapplied. These admissions are politically and socially costly. Institutions resist them. Narratives are defended. Blame is deflected. Meanwhile, individuals continue to adapt independently. As this continues, the concept of society itself changes. Instead of a single integrated system, we get overlapping but loosely connected ecosystems. People move between them selectively. Identity becomes modular. One person may participate economically in one system, socially in another, and emotionally in a third. This modularity has advantages. It allows customization, it reduces exposure, it increases resilience, but it also reduces shared understanding. People speak past each other because they inhabit different worlds with different rules. For men, modularity offers control. They can engage where it makes sense and disengage elsewhere. They can avoid environments that feel hostile or inefficient. This selective engagement becomes a core strategy. For women, modularity is more challenging because many systems they rely on assume broad participation. When those systems fragment, navigation becomes complex. Without clear pathways, stress increases, uncertainty grows. This asymmetry further entrenches the divide. Each side adapts in ways that make the other feel excluded or abandoned. Intentions matter less than outcomes. At this point, Some people attempt to frame the situation as a battle or competition. That framing is misleading. Most men are not trying to defeat women, they are trying to avoid loss. Most women are not trying to control men, they are trying to maintain stability. When survival instincts dominate, conflict narratives oversimplify reality. The deeper issue is that the old balance between contribution and reward has shifted. When people believe they give more than they receive, resentment builds. When they believe they receive more than they give, complacency builds. Neither state is sustainable. Historically, societies corrected these imbalances through shared hardship, external threats, or transformative leadership. Absent those forces, correction is slow and uneven. People self correct individually rather than collectively. This individual correction is what we are witnessing now. Men recalibrate involvement, women recalibrate expectations, institutions lag behind both. One of the most important questions moving forward is how children raised in this environment will view relationships. They will not inherit the assumptions of their parents, they will see separation as normal. They will see independence as default. Partnership will be optional rather than expected. This could lead to healthier relationships for some, built on genuine choice rather than obligation, but it could also lead to widespread isolation if trust is not restored. The outcome depends on whether new frameworks emerge that balance autonomy with cooperation. Education could play a role here, but only if it evolves. Teaching outdated social scripts is counterproductive. Young people need tools to navigate complexity, manage risk, and build reciprocal relationships. They need realistic models, not idealized ones. Media also plays a role, but credibility matters. Narratives that ignore lived experience fail to persuade. People trust what aligns with observation. When media messaging diverges from reality, disengagement increases. Technology will continue to shape outcomes. Artificial intelligence, automation, and digital platforms will reduce the need for human interaction in many areas. This amplifies the trend toward independence. At the same time, it increases the value of authentic connection where it still exists. Those who can offer reliability, competence, and respect will remain valuable partners, collaborators, and friends. Those who rely solely on entitlement or expectation will struggle. This brings us to the individual level. Regardless of broader trends, each person still makes choices. Understanding the landscape allows better decisions. For men, this often means continuing to build skills, reduce liabilities, and choose environments carefully. For women, it may mean recalibrating expectations, focusing on resilience, and seeking partnerships grounded in mutual benefit rather than assumption. Neither path is easy. Both require humility and adaptation. The era of automatic roles is over. What replaces it will be shaped by those willing to engage honestly with reality. The future is not predetermined. It is shaped by incentives, choices, and feedback loops. Right now, the feedback loop rewards disengagement. Changing that would require aligning cooperation with safety and fairness again. Until that happens, fragmentation will continue. People will build lives that make sense to them, even if those lives look unfamiliar to previous generations. Judging those choices without understanding their context only deepens the divide. If this trajectory continues without interruption, the world does not suddenly collapse in a dramatic moment. There is no single event that signals the end of the old order. Instead, society thins out. It becomes quieter, less vibrant, less connected. The structures remain standing, but the spirit that animated them fades. What remains is functionality without warmth, order without cohesion, and interaction without investment. The first thing to disappear in this kind of environment is generosity. Not charity in the formal sense, but everyday generosity. The kind that once existed naturally between people who trusted one another, holding doors, offering help, mentoring without expecting anything in return. paying forward effort because it felt right. These small acts were never mandated, yet they were essential. When they vanish, life becomes more rigid and less humane. Men withdrawing from social obligation accelerates this loss. Historically, men absorbed a great deal of invisible responsibility. They fixed things quietly. They absorbed stress silently. They stepped into danger, uncertainty, and burden without needing recognition. When that behavior stops, it is not immediately obvious. Only later do people notice that problems linger longer, repairs take longer, and solutions cost more. As this happens, people begin to interact with systems instead of people. You no longer ask someone for help. You submit a request. You do not resolve misunderstandings informally. You escalate them formally. Everything becomes slower, colder, and more expensive. And this is the price of low trust environments. Women feel this shift intensely because many aspects of modern life were built on the assumption that men would continue providing informal support. When that support evaporates, women are left navigating bureaucracies that were never designed to replace it fully. The result is frustration and fatigue, not empowerment. At the same time, men become increasingly invisible in public life, not absent, but uninterested. They go to work if they work, they return home, they engage online or within small circles. They stop participating in communal rituals that once defined adulthood. Public spaces lose their balance. This invisibility is often misinterpreted as apathy or failure. In reality, it is strategic withdrawal. Men learn that visibility carries risk without reward. Being seen invites scrutiny. Being quiet invites peace. Over time, peace wins. As more men adopt this mindset, the definition of success shifts. Success is no longer about recognition or status, it becomes about optionality. Can you leave when you want? Can you say no without consequence? Can you survive disruption without panic? These are the metrics that matter in uncertain systems. This change reshapes male psychology. Men become more internally anchored, less reactive, less invested in external validation. This has benefits, but it also creates distance. Emotional expression narrows, vulnerability becomes selective. Trust is reserved for a few rather than extended broadly. Women encountering this version of men often feel shut out. They sense walls where there were once doors, conversations feel transactional, warmth feels conditional. What they are encountering is not cruelty, but containment. Men are conserving energy. As this becomes normalized, dating and relationships transform further. Partnerships, when they occur, are pragmatic. Emotional intensity is replaced by compatibility. Shared goals matter more than romance. Stability matters more than passion. This suits some people well. Others find it unsatisfying. Marriage, once a default aspiration, becomes a niche choice. It is pursued deliberately rather than assumed. Those who enter it do so cautiously, often with safeguards and exit strategies in mind. The idea of unconditional commitment feels incompatible with a high risk environment. This cautious approach extends to parenting. Fewer people choose to have children. Those who do plan meticulously. They limit exposure. They prioritize control. Parenting becomes another domain where risk management overrides tradition. The demographic consequences are profound. Aging populations strain public systems. Fewer workers support more dependents. Governments attempt to compensate through policy, but policies cannot manufacture trust or desire. They can only redistribute resources that already exist. As tax bases shrink and obligations grow, states face hard choices. They cut services, they raise costs, they increase enforcement. Each move further alienates those who are still productive. Compliance becomes grudging, loyalty fades. Men already disengaged emotionally disengage further economically. They minimize taxable activity. They move assets. They operate in gray zones where possible. not out of malice, but self preservation. Women relying on public systems feel the squeeze from the opposite direction. Services deteriorate, costs rise, promises feel hollow, the sense of security erodes, anxiety increases. This dynamic fuels a quiet resentment on both sides. Men feel blamed for stepping back, women feel abandoned. Each side feels the other does not understand their reality. Dialogue becomes performative rather than sincere. In this environment, narratives harden. Simplistic explanations gain traction because complexity is exhausting. Some people seek villains, others retreat into nostalgia. Neither approach solves the underlying problem. The real issue is that cooperation has become optional, but the systems we inhabit still assume it is automatic. This mismatch creates friction everywhere. As artificial intelligence accelerates job displacement, the divide widens. Those who adapt early gain leverage. Those who rely on legacy systems struggle. Men, accustomed to abstraction and experimentation, often pivot more quickly. They learn tools, they automate tasks, they monetize niches. Women face a more complex transition. Many roles historically occupied by women are among the first to be automated or devalued. Social skills alone are no longer sufficient when interaction itself becomes optional. Value must be demonstrable and scalable. This creates a feedback loop where men gain more autonomy while women face increasing dependency. Dependency breeds frustration. Frustration seeks relief. Without clear solutions, blame becomes tempting. But blame is useless here. The system does not care about feelings, it responds to incentives. And the incentives currently reward disengagement, self sufficiency, and risk avoidance. Some individuals attempt to resist this trend by doubling down on traditional ideals. They advocate for romance, community, and shared sacrifice. While well intentioned, these efforts often fail because they ignore the changed environment. Ideals without infrastructure collapse under pressure. Others attempt to accelerate the trend, celebrating isolation and independence as ultimate virtues. This too is incomplete. Humans are social beings. Total isolation leads to its own form of decay. The sustainable path lies somewhere between these extremes. But finding it requires honesty. It requires admitting that the old social contract no longer works as written. It requires rewriting it based on current realities rather than past assumptions. That rewriting cannot be imposed from above. It must emerge from lived experience. People must see that cooperation offers real benefits again. That safety is mutual. That responsibility and authority are aligned. Until then, individuals will continue optimizing for themselves. This is not a moral failure, it is a rational response to uncertainty. For men, this often means continuing to walk away quietly, not from humanity, but from systems that punish participation. For women, it means confronting the limits of institutional support and rediscovering forms of resilience that do not rely on guarantees. Neither journey is easy. Both involve loss. But pretending otherwise delays adaptation. Reconnection is possible, but only if alignment is restored. That means reducing asymmetry, restoring trust, rewarding contribution, limiting arbitrary punishment, making cooperation feel safe again. Without those changes, the future is one of parallel lives, men and women occupying the same physical space, but inhabiting different worlds, interacting when necessary, avoiding when possible. This future is not dramatic, it is quiet. And because it is quiet, many will not notice until it feels normal. By then, reversing it will be far harder than acknowledging it now. When everything is stripped away, what remains is not a war between men and women, but a quiet reckoning with reality. People do not abandon systems lightly. They leave when participation no longer feels safe, fair, or worthwhile. What we are witnessing right now is not chaos, but a rebalancing that happens whenever incentives drift too far from outcomes. History shows that societies correct themselves either through awareness or through hardship. The difference lies in how much damage occurs before the correction takes place. For men, the lesson has already been learned at scale. Engagement without protection is not noble, it is reckless. Commitment without reciprocity is not virtuous, it is unsustainable. Responsibility without authority is not leadership, it is liability. These realizations did not arrive overnight. They were formed slowly through repetition, observation, and consequence. Once internalized, they do not fade easily. This is why many men no longer argue their case publicly. They do not feel the need to convince anyone. Convincing implies dependency on approval. They have already moved beyond that stage. Instead, they live differently. They choose quieter lives. They reduce exposure. They build buffers. They opt for control over recognition. To outsiders, this can look like detachment or indifference, but from the inside, it feels like relief. That relief is addictive. When stress decreases and stability increases, behavior locks in. Men who once felt constant pressure begin to feel space to think, space to plan, space to breathe. They rediscover hobbies, skills, and interests that were sidelined by obligation. They reconnect with other men in ways that are direct and unburdened by pretense. These connections are not loud, but they are durable. Women encountering the shift often experience confusion first, then frustration. The rules they were told governed, society no longer seemed to apply. Effort does not produce the same results. Signals are misread. Expectations go unmet. Many women respond by seeking explanations in culture, politics, or ideology. Few are encouraged to look at incentives. Incentives matter because they shape behavior regardless of intention. When the cost of engagement rises and the reward falls, people disengage. This is not cruelty, it is economics applied to social life. Men are responding to the environment they inhabit, not the one they are told should exist. As this environment hardens, new norms emerge. Men stop approaching, they stop initiating, they stop offering unrequested assistance, they stop playing roles that carry asymmetric risk. Women accustomed to being approached and assisted feel the absence sharply. What once felt like entitlement now feels like abandonment, but the underlying structure has changed. This change is most visible in everyday moments. Silence where conversation once flowed, empty seats where couples once sat, tasks left undone because no one volunteered. These are not dramatic events, but they accumulate. Over time, the texture of daily life shifts. One of the most profound changes is the disappearance of male motivation tied to social approval. For generations, men were driven by the promise that contribution would be rewarded with respect, family, and belonging. When that promise weakened, motivation redirected inward. Men began asking a different question: not what society needs from me, but what I need to remain stable. This inward turn is not inherently selfish, it is protective. But it does mean that society can no longer rely on default male sacrifice. Sacrifice must now be justified. It must make sense. And in many cases, it does not. This creates a dilemma for institutions that were built on assumptions of male participation. They can attempt to pressure men back into engagement, but pressure without legitimacy breeds resistance. They can attempt to incentivize engagement, but incentives require resources that are already strained. Or they can adapt to reduce participation, which means downsizing expectations. Most institutions choose denial first. They insist nothing fundamental has changed. They issue statements, they run campaigns, they appeal to ideals. Meanwhile, behavior continues to diverge. The gap between narrative and reality widens. Individuals navigating this landscape face a choice. They can cling to old scripts and suffer repeated disappointment, or they can adapt. Adaptation does not require bitterness. It requires honesty, honest assessment of risk, honest evaluation of reward, honest acceptance of limits. For men, healthy adaptation means building a life that is resilient without becoming isolated. It means maintaining boundaries without hardening into hostility. It means choosing relationships deliberately rather than reflexively. It means investing in skills, health, and financial stability, not to impress, but to endure. For women, healthy adaptation means recognizing that institutional guarantees are not substitutes for personal resilience. It means recalibrating expectations around partnership and support. It means prioritizing cooperation over leverage, reciprocity over entitlement. It means understanding that attraction and commitment are not obligations, but choices made under perceived safety. These adaptations are not easy. They require letting go of comforting myths. They require humility. They require a willingness to see the world as it is rather than as it was promised to be. But they also open the door to more authentic interactions. Authentic cooperation cannot be demanded. It must be chosen freely by both sides. And choice only exists when people feel safe enough to engage. Restoring that sense of safety is the only path toward reconnection. Safety does not mean insulation from consequence. It means predictability. It means clear rules applied evenly. It means accountability that flows in all directions. It means respect that is earned through contribution, not granted by category. Without these elements, the current trajectory continues. Men continue to walk away quietly. Women continue to feel the absence acutely. Society continues to thin out, not collapse, but hollow. The danger of a hollow society is not violence or disorder, it is stagnation. Innovation slows, creativity narrows, trust evaporates. People stop dreaming big because the cost of failure feels too high. Risk aversion spreads. At the same time, small pockets of vitality persist, tight knit groups, skilled individuals, resilient networks. These become the real engines of progress, operating below the surface. They do not announce themselves, they simply function. The future likely belongs to those who can move fluidly between independence and cooperation, who can stand alone without rejecting connection, who can collaborate without surrendering autonomy. These skills will matter more than ideology. This brings the conversation back to you, the listener. Regardless of gender, regardless of background, you are navigating the same shifting terrain. The question is not who is right, but how you will respond. Will you wait for systems to change? Or will you adjust your own behavior to protect your future? Will you cling to narratives that no longer fit? Or will you build something that works in the world as it exists now? There is no universal answer, but there is clarity in acknowledging reality. The old assumptions no longer hold, and participation is no longer guaranteed. Cooperation must be earned anew. Before we close, I want to hear from you. What did you think about what was discussed in this video? Do you agree with the direction things are moving? Are you seeing similar patterns in your own life or among people you know? Leave a comment and share your thoughts because these conversations matter and they help bring clarity to issues that are often ignored or misunderstood. Like the video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.